Thank you for joining us today for our 9th segment of our Genealogy Beginner Series, Building and Researching Your Family Tree. Today, we're going to do a census walkthrough, accumulation of all the research you've already done and using the census to go back in time to trace your ancestors. We're going to be using my family as an example, and so I hope today that you will listen carefully and see how this will work for your family. This video is co-produced or co-sponsored by the Central Texas Genealogical Society, and we thank them for their support. So as I said, today we're going to overview walking back through the research you've already done, starting with yourself, gathering information from your own home records and those of your relatives, close relatives, and examining some of the evaluation of the information that we find on those records and how it all fits together with the census. So our overall strategy is to take what you found from yourself back in time to find that ancestor that is listed in the 1940 census. So what kind of records might those be? Well, 1, family stories. 2, you might find an obituary clipped from a newspaper. You might have gone out to the cemetery to take a look at what was on the tombstone. In this case, this is my grandfather, Thomas Addison Buckner and Jr., and his wife, Inda Virginia. He was also, there's an additional stone for his military service. And so there we have that he was in the Army in World War II. His birth and death dates are listed there. So yes, people can have more than one marker. You also want to look at the family plot that you find the tombstone in. Is it a case in concrete around curbing to identify it as a family plot? Who else is buried in that family plot? So here we had, in our records, we had an obituary for my grandfather. And notice that it just says that he died Tuesday, and they clipped this without any dates or the source of the newspaper that it came from. And so it also says that he was born in Bandera County, Bandera, Texas. We're not quite sure, but we do know that. And he lived in various towns in the Texas Hill Country. So as a reminder about newspapers, where to access those, we have newspapers.com, which we use here in the library, Portal to Texas History, which is a free site on the internet. Also Chronicling America of the Library of Congress. There are print indexes and abstracts and collections, and also microfilm you might find in our library. So confirm the information. So we took the cemetery tombstone record, and we had one of those, the tombstone itself just said, the year. And then we also wanted to look at the military stone, which had a date of actual death. And so in the death index, we have 15th of October of 1985. That matches the tombstone. Social Security death index, we have a month and year, so that helps support that death index record, which is an official record. So we have a good choice of that. Yes, he died in 85. When was he born? According to the Social Security, December 24th of 1906. So that matched the military record. So that military record has been applied for and sent off and received and put on the grave, but what is the official source of that? So we'll have to explore that a little bit more. So let's look at military record. Can we confirm that he was actually in the military? And we find a World War II draft record card, okay? So here we confirm his name, Thomas Addison Buckner. We don't see a junior on here or anything like that. We have a birth date, and now this is in his hand of the December 24th of 1906. Place of birth, the newspaper obituary said Bandera, and so it does here again, it says place of birth as Bandera. his wife's name, Enda Virginia, so that matched what was on the tombstone. It also gives the address of 323 Veramendi, a place where family knowledge is that I spent a lot of time there as a child, and also his employer, the San Marcos paper. The obituary starts off saying something about he was in the newspaper business, and so that matches that as well. So confirm the information that you have, that you gathered with other official records, working your way back to say, I'm fairly confident Thomas Addison Buckner Jr. will be in the 1940 census. So this record again confirms that he was in the military. It also gives some about education, his what he did for a living, and where he was stationed in Fort Sam Houston outside of San Antonio. Now, the census records, of course, are completed every 10 years, starting in 1790. We talked during the census module of this segment of this series about there was a 72-year agreement between the time that the census was taken to the time it was released. So just the good news is that next year, April 1st of 2022, the 1950 census will be released. And we have determined that it's going to be released not on microfilm, but digitally. It still has to be indexed and still has to be something happen to it to help us search it, but it will be digitally released. So we use Ancestry Library Edition. Of course, there's Family Search, there's Heritage Quest, there's other sources of digital access to the census, but we're going to use Ancestry Library Edition today. And so somewhere on the Ancestry page, you'll find a collection of the census records. And so we're going to start with 1940 and just click on 1940. And we're going to put in my grandfather went by Addison. And so that's family knowledge. And so I put in Addison as a first or middle name. And last name Buckner, and I should expect that I'm going to find something about him, knowing that his address was 323 Veramendi in San Marcos, Hays County. For this military record of World War II, that I put in Hays County. Now, when I started typing in Hay, it pulled up this controlled vocabulary. You'll find that common in most of the genealogy databases. It's a way to help you connect with records that have been identified with that controlled vocabulary. So always use the controlled vocabulary when you have that option. Also, if you don't get any hits, you might find a way to put in different names, nicknames, initials, spelling variations to find what you're searching for, because what we're going to determine is that errors occur in the census all the time. Okay, all the time. So I expected that I would find my grandfather in the census because when the 1940 census came out, we did it manually and were able to find his record. The indexing, when we put it in, gives us a little bit different result. And actually with Addison Buckner, 1906, we got 0 hits. So if you look at the 2 records that did pop up, neither one of these are my grandfather. So what do we do? So, well, looking at these 2 records, there's one there that's Thomas A. Buchner, B-U-C-H-N-E-R, born 1935. That sounded like my father, and it looked like my father's record. And so I clicked on that record, and there was his name. And then when I look down at who lived in the household, I see a T. Addison Berkner, another misspelling. So you have, that's my grandfather. So we have 2 misspellings of the surname Buckner in the same record. We have B-U-R-K-N-E-R for my grandfather and B-U-C-H-N-E-R for my father and other people in the household. So this is just a prime example of the misspellings that you're going to find. So when you do not find your ancestor in the census, be sure to note that they're probably there. You're just going to have to dig a little deeper and try a little harder. So you'll look for transcription errors. That's why these print indexes that you find in various libraries or online are important, because somebody has transcribed or indexed those census records. And every time you get a new transcription, you have a better chance of either making mistakes or helping you find your ancestors. When you look at the original, you always want to click on the original. What information is missing? Look at the neighbors. So looking at this record, we have T. Addison Buckner, head of the household. He's 33 years old in 1940. He has a wife of I. Virginia Buckner, that's into Virginia, and she is 29. Then there's a Thomas a son at 5 years, and a Suzanne at 4.5 months. So the 4/12 is months. So in 1930, if he was how old in 1940, he was 33. So 10 years less, he should be 23. And so we look in the same place. We've got Hayes County. Okay, we've got the right age. He's 23, 10 years younger. He still has a wife of Virginia who is 19. And but what is this? We have several different entries for the same person, roughly born in 1907. We know exactly that he was born in 1906. So that's an estimate. But there's two different records. And you know, this is just an example of how easy it is to see that you may have multiple records for the same individual in the census. And so it's an accident, of course. It wasn't done deliberately, but the reasons for it, in this case, my grandfather was building a house, and so they were living in an apartment. And so one census taker came by the apartment, one came by the house and interviewed somebody. Now, remember that we do not know who they interviewed, the census taker, except for the 1940 census. So here in 1930, we have two different entries. What other types of record situations could there be? It could be a student away from home, someone that was single and then got married in the time frame of the census when it was being taken, someone in prison, someone in the military. So there are different reasons for multiple records, and you should look for those. It's also important to look at the header of the original record, because one, it'll have the census date. So in 1930 census, the official census date was April 1st of 1930. That changes over time. It could be June, April. You need to look at that date. And then also the date that the census taker actually filled out the information. And so here we have an April 15th and an date of April 8th for the other record. Not that much difference, but can we, one record said she was 18, one said she was 19. Let's just go back real quick. Yep, 18 and 19. So does that explain it? Does that give us a birth date? Do we have any information about her birth date, my grandmother's birth date, that might have changed that for the census taker? These are kinds of questions you should be asking yourself as you evaluate the record. Now, census questions. Every census has different questions. A lot of them are the same, but the government always likes to ask more questions. It's important to know that your ancestor on every census of his life would be answering these questions, and the context of these questions will give you more information about who they were, where they were, and what the family looked like. So again, 1940 is the only year we know who answered the questions, and the link here is to a site that gives you those questions, and you should use those and review them, how they were supposed to be answered as a census taker asked them. So when in the 1930 census, the question was, when did they get married and what age were they getting married? How old were they at the time the census taken? And then how old were they when they were first married? So you want to use some basic logic. So in 1930, Addison was 23, his wife was 18, and they got married when he was 23 and his wife was 18. So logically, you would say, were they living in Hayes County? Did they get married the year of the census, which the census date was April 1st? Or did they get married previously prior to their ages? So this is when you start doing some figuring, doing a little bit of logic looking. And then if we look at the actual marriage certificate, they got married in Seguin, which is not in Hayes County. And they got married the year before in 1929. Again, we find a marriage notice in the Austin American Statesman that helps support the marriage certificate. So this is how you start evaluating the records from the census against other records and confirming facts that you find in the census with other official documents. Now, I highly encourage you to read the entire census, not just I found them and go to the next census, but to look at every single question. And in this case, in the 1930 census, my grandfather is listed as a printer in the newspaper business. We saw that from his obituary that he was in the newspaper business. And so that's a good confirmation that what we found so far in our private records and our personal records and our family records matches what we're finding on the census. And that will help you in the long run get past those roadblocks that you're asking yourself. So always look at these because they might provide additional clues to the census. So in 1920, how old should Addison be? If he was 23 in 1930, he should be how old in 1920? He should be what? 13. So is he married? Let's think not, maybe not. He's not married. And so we're looking for an Addison Buckner at age of 13. And we find one in the census, Addison Buckner, age 13, home in 1920 as Bandera. So we remember that in that obituary, it said that he was born in Bandera. So could this be our Addison? Is the right name and the right age enough to say that you've got the right person? Now, you have to ask yourself these questions because the idea is that there are multiple people with the same name in this world and living in the same time. And we've even had people with the same spouse's names and the kids roughly the same names because it's generational. They name those children. So you have to be careful. That's why it's so important. You start with yourself and collect as much information for each generation because it's going to give you the clues that you need to get past and confirm that you're on the right track. You don't want to be the guy that showed up at my desk one day and said, I have been researching for 10 years along the wrong line of inquiry. And I just found that out today. So that's something you don't want to have happen to you. You want to build your case and your proof for each generation as deep as you possibly can. So in the 1920, my grandfather was 13, and it said that he was a typesetter, i.e. something related to the newspaper business. His father, this person that's listed with him, was the editor of a weekly newspaper. So that plus the place that he lived, plus the age, plus his name, was also giving us the information that I probably had the right person. Now in 1910, back another 10 years, Addison should be what age? He should be 3, right? And so here I have a picture of him at the age of 3. Wasn't he cute little guy? And it lists him as Thomas, note the variation in the spelling, A, Buckner, and Junior. So Junior, did we see that before? Yes, we did. We saw that on the cemetery tombstone. And so again, that is helping us provide that profile that we are looking at the right person. And so what is his father's name? It's Thomas A. And so if my grandfather was a junior, then Thomas A should be what? Possibly a senior. Now, I want to point out that Thomas A Jr. was not the oldest son. So you have to remember that the senior, junior, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, it's not always generational. It's not always in sequence of the son, the first son of the person born. It could be a son down the line in a family, third son born to the person. It could skip a generation. So you have to remember that that's another whole lecture in itself. But do know that when you find a junior, thus there probably was a senior somewhere in that direct lineage somewhere down the line. So just remember that about naming patterns. So here we have in the 1910 census as well, we have, so Addison is 3, and we're looking at that census. We know his father is probably Thomas A. Buckner Sr. And there's a category there that says M1 and then 15 and 6 and 4. So what is all that? Well, that's telling us that this was a first marriage between Thomas and Harriet. They had been married for at least 15 years. And also that they had had 6 children and 4 had survived. And so this is just an important piece of information to know that there might be other children born to a family that you may not know anything about. It's not as if people sat around on Sunday after church dinner and talked about the children that passed away. You want to look at where they lived. And so we know that Addison was born in Bandera, and in 1910, he's in Kerr County. And so we want to look and see if there is a family plot there to identify those children. So that's another avenue to go look at. Also, this is a great census to look and see if the children, 6 children and 4 are still living. They're married for 15 years and the oldest child is 13. And so this is confirming that yes, this probably is their first marriage, and there's no children that don't have, too old for the marriage or too young for the marriage. One thing we want to point out about, as we've been doing beginners classes for a while, that Ancestry is continually updating its products. And so there's more information that gets indexed, transcribed from the census in time, and probably will continue to be transcribed and indexed and improved. So this just gives you more search options and better summaries. So if you couldn't find your ancestors 7 or 8 years ago, you might redo the research and see if they pop up more recently. That's a good reason to keep a research log and see what you need to find and keep researching through time. Remember that you always want to look at the original and not just trust the transcriptions or abstracts. Now, we did a timeline on Addison. He was born in 1906. So we first find him in the 1910 census in Kerr County, and then in 1920 census in Bandera, and so forth and so on. The little summary is that he was one of 6 children born to Harriet and Thomas Addison Buckner Sr. He began his career in the newspaper business at an early age. So we saw him at the age of 14 years old. He was already working as a typesetter. He married Inda Virginia Anderson at the age of 23 in the Methodist Church in Seguin. 1944, he enlisted in the U.S. Army and served as a private in World War II. This is a picture of my dad, the young fellow there, my grandfather and his father. All 3 of them were in the publishing business of newspapers in San Marcos. And so more records that you might want to look at. We have birth, marriage, family records, probate, all kinds of different records that might help you. And then also you want to remember the search strategies. Compare any new information to records that you've already found as you search the census. Always look for or at the original record. Sometimes the transcriptions are not what the person doing the transcription did not know your family as well as you did, and you can probably understand what the writing was better than they did. Keep an open mind about spelling variations, and every time you lead, every record you find should lead you to new records. And so when you find a record or find a fact in the census, ask yourself, what record can confirm this piece of evidence, or what record do I have that tells me it leads to another record? So we thank you. And also, if you have any questions, be sure to call us here at the Genealogy Center. We're located at 5301 Bosque Boulevard, Suite 275, and also our phone number of 750-5945. We're always here and wanting to help you. And so give us a call, and thank you for watching today. Thank you.